Questions for reflection. Given the principle of interpretation we spoke of yesterday, viewing the Old Testament scriptures through the lens of the Paschal mystery, we see that the words spoken through the Hebrew prophet Jeremiah were messianic. They would ultimately be fulfilled many, many years later in the saving life, death, and resurrection of the Son of God, Jesus, the Christ. He is that Lamb who would be led to the slaughter. In the words of the prophet, and I quote, "I for my part was like a trustful lamb being led to the slaughterhouse, not knowing the schemes they were plotting against me. Let us destroy the tree and its strength. Let us cut him off from the land of the living, so that his name may no longer be remembered." The same imagery is found in another of the messianic prophets of the Old Testament, Isaiah. In chapter 53, we read of a suffering servant of Yahweh. In verse 7, we find this powerful prophetic image of the one whom we know as Christians was and is Jesus Christ. And I quote, "He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth." That's Isaiah 53:7. Now that we know this principle of interpretation, do we read these Old Testament books differently? We should. The psalmist David leads us in a song crying out for God to save us from difficulties. This psalm is a plea for help in times of persecution. The first verse, which is not a part of this excerpt which forms our response, says, and I quote, "Lord my God, in you I trusted. Save me. Rescue me from all who pursue me." Persecution is a part of following the Lord in the midst of an age which has all but rejected him. It was promised by Jesus himself. He told us, and I quote Jesus, "If the world hates you, realize that it hated me first. If you belong to the world would love its own. But because you do not belong to the world, and I have chosen you out of the world hates you. Remember the word I spoke to you. No servant is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you." And that's from John 15, verses 18 to 20. If we are not suffering some kind of persecution and opposition, we are not living our faith. There is no doubt we are living in an age of growing persecution against Christians. In these times, the Lord is searching for men and women who believe in his promises, all of them, and are willing to be used by him to reveal his plan. Let us become those men and women. Let us live ready for what lies ahead. Notice the response of the crowd to Jesus in the gospel text presented to us for today's Mass, taken from the account of St. John. Some thought he was the prophet. Some thought he was the promised Messiah. Others failed to recognize him at all and indeed rejected him. Others wanted to arrest him. Finally, we read, they all went home. How sad. They missed the moment. They failed to recognize who Jesus was, and as a result, they lost their way. We read of the following encounter between Jesus and the disciples in the Gospel of St. Matthew, and I quote, "Jesus went into the region of Caesarea Philippi, and he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say that the Son of Man is?' They replied, 'Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets.' He said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?' Simon Peter said in reply, 'You are the Christ, the Son of the living God.' Jesus said to him in reply, 'Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my heavenly Father. And so I say to you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And that's from Matthew 16, verses 13 to 20. The same question is asked of each one of us. Who do you say that I am? It is not just asked once, but continually. It's meant to inform the response of our entire life. How we answer that question determines who we will become and how we will live. It's a question which cannot be answered indirectly or half-heartedly. It's not enough to rely on what some say. The question is profoundly personal, as well as public. Who is Jesus Christ to me? And how does my answer affect the way I live?